What do you get if you take terrified Western women, scarred by modernity, blighted by depression, conflicted with guilt and shame, and promise them a way out of that darkness, a way they can regain meaning and purpose in their lives, a cause they can contribute to, a movement where they will find value?
There is a growing group of women who say they are on a birth strike. They're too scared, they say, to have children because of what they call ecological Armageddon. Let's meet some of them in an exclusive TV interview. Blythe Pepino, who is here, she's the founder of Birth Strike, and Alice Brown, who's 25, and says she's so scared about the future of the planet, it's actually debilitating for her. Welcome, both of you.
And I ended up getting depression for about a year, and everything came crashing down around me. I lost everything, all my friends, and my job stuff and my career, really.
I felt like a hypocrite.
For me personally, it's about me being able to put my time and resources into activism at the moment. I'm lucky enough to have a certain amount of power in this world. I'm white and privileged, and I don't have any children, I don't have any dependents.
Why are you on Birth Strike, Blythe?
Because I'm terrified. And that's putting it mildly.
Each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless.
One of the biggest battering rams used against the indigenous peoples of Europe is environmentalism. On the surface, it may seem like a harmless collection of hippie types comedically chaining themselves to airport runways. But underneath, it has always been a vehicle for inflicting yet more guilt, more shame upon us, for the lives we lead and the civilization we exist in. There are lots of sects within the green movement. But today I'd like to talk about a very specific and especially insidious element that I've noticed gain some traction in recent months. Allow me to introduce you to Birth Strike, a growing movement of mainly young, white, middle-class British women who are vowing to not have any children until the climate crisis is resolved. They may appear to have a small online presence, with their YouTube channel barely having an audience, and their official website being nothing more than a Tumblr page, but believe me, they are being promoted everywhere, with the mainstream media and other global platforms giving them airtime literally everywhere you look. It's interesting how that always seems to happen, isn't it? I'll go into more detail on the movement itself and its leader as we go through this video. But first I'd like to examine the mere concept of Western women refusing to have kids because of environmental activism, and what this really means in practice. The population of Britain has ballooned over the course of several decades. We now live in a country with nearly 65 million people, and the projections only show this will rise in the future. For such a small island, that's an incredible amount. So you may think that these women, on the surface, are concerned with overpopulation and are just trying to do their bit, right? Well, you'd be wrong. As on the Birth Strike website, it very clearly states, Birth Strike disagrees with prioritising population control over systems change in regard to tackling the environmental crisis. Disagrees with any enforced population control measures and recognises the colonial violence of such measures having been proposed in the past and present. Population control measures. What, like strong borders and a competent immigration system, for example? Oh yes, those things are colonial in nature. They are violent, according to these activists. The leader of Birth Strike herself, Blythe Pepino, went on the BBC and clarified her stance on population control, claiming that she and the other women are simply too scared to bring kids into the world as it is, and they're against population measures.
This texter says, doesn't leave the name, I'm a woman not having kids because of the planet. Why do we keep breeding and suffocating ourselves? The problem is too many people on the planet. Why does no one see this? We would be culled if we were animals. Instead, we are culling everything. We are the threat. Ray says, guess what? The world is overpopulated. Anything to reduce the population has to be a good thing. How does your partner feel about your decision?
Can I just come back on that, actually?
Yeah.
Because that's a really important point. So a lot of people conflate what we're doing with advocating for population control. And population is an issue. Even if there was a catastrophic event mid-century, we'd still have numbers by the end of the century that would be a massive problem. But the fact is, and it's been proven, that if we don't change how we live now, we haven't got a chance. So population is something we need to talk about, but it has to be voluntary. And so the changes that we make, that we could possibly make with population, are just not enough to make any kind of difference.
I find this stance very convenient indeed. Because, let's be honest, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is their way of letting themselves off the hook in talking about potentially insensitive things. Because it's simply an indisputable fact that the more people you have living in a space, the more strain and pressure the systems of that place will be under. Mass migration to Britain has skyrocketed over this time period, with the vast majority of people coming from outside of the European Union. Yet this unwillingness by environmentalists, especially mainstream political parties like the Green Party, to be honest and to tell the truth about the damage this does, essentially makes their entire political platform a joke from the off. Just as one example, we hear from politicians like the Greens all day long about how our precious public services can't cope, how there's a housing crisis in Britain and all that. Their solution is, as always, to throw money at the problem, just endless amounts of cash. That'll fix everything. But we know that's not the case. We know that the biggest factor in this issue is an unchecked rising population. Let's take the housing crisis. Estimates show that to keep up with population growth and demand, a new house must be built in Britain every 6 or 7 minutes. Now that is ridiculous. It's unsustainable. It is impossible. But the Green Party never mention mass migration being a factor behind this, and therefore I'm assuming they'll be more than happy to build houses all over the countryside to avoid being called racist. More bricks and mortar, fewer fields and trees, but at least that pesky colonial violence is kept under control, eh? Robin Maynard from a charity called Population Matters was quoted as saying, "Birth rates and migration fluctuate from year to year, but our already unsustainable population is continuing to rise, and that will continue until a positive strategy is put in place to address it. The government has announced ambitious plans to achieve a zero-carbon economy, but by ignoring our unsustainable population growth, it is driving with the brakes on. More people means more emitters and more emissions. Our growing numbers are incompatible with our climate change commitments, the health of our environment, and the quality of our life." Well, that sounds like common sense to me. More people, more problems. So perhaps part of the solution is to seriously restrict immigration to this country, first of all, and then to get rid of people who have no genuine or beneficial reason in being here. Until environmentalism fully acknowledges this point, they will remain a dishonest laughingstock. But the issue of population numbers brings up so many talking points that have been thrusted into the mainstream consciousness by our political enemies for a long time. Remember how we are often told that we need mass migration because our native birth rates have fallen below population replacement levels? If we didn't import all of those Pakistanis and Africans, well, Britain would crumble and die. And while it's true, it's so depressingly true, that native birth rates across the West are the lowest levels in the world, our leaders have never tried to fix this through effective policy. No, they've chosen instead to import the rest of the world and change our societies beyond recognition. That was their go-to answer. But we know that if the will and intent is there, the native population of a country can be rejuvenated and incentivized into having children of their own. Take Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, who has rejected the mass migration globalist scheme in favour of saving his own people, and so far, his policies are having a positive impact. Laura Towler made a great video about this. I'll link it down below if you want to find out more. But like I said, the intent and will needs to exist in the first place, and it's obvious that Western leaders lack this mindset, and you can draw your own conclusions as to why. Again though, this shines negatively upon the environmentalists, especially the birth strikers. White Western women aren't having enough kids anyway, so what possible effect do these girls think they're having? What added benefit to the environment do they provide by refusing to get knocked up? Well, that's just the thing, and the underlining point about all of this: nothing. Literally nothing positive is being achieved here, at least from our perspective. Because these women don't actually care about the population growth, as Blythe said on the BBC. But if you are an environmentalist, that has to be on your mind, that has to be on the agenda. If we can go back to birth rates for a second, we can see that yes, the West is the lowest, but the highest rates belong to the third world. Africa and the Middle East, to be more specific. Africa is the big one though. Oh boy. Over the next century, Africa's population is set to explode to over 4 billion people. If you think Africa has problems now, what with poverty, disease and corruption, well, you haven't seen anything yet. When will these women, who are sitting in nice warm television studios preaching the beauty of self-sacrifice, when will they address this situation? When will they hop on a plane and, sorry, too many carbon emissions there. When will they string a wooden raft together with their armpit hair and sail to Africa to lecture those women about the dangers having children poses to the natural world? When will they preach that they too all go on a birth strike? And the answer is, they never will. They'll continue to lecture to their core audience, white Western women, to further their own people's demise with the backing of the mainstream media, yet say nothing about the expansion of Africa, all the while rallying against evil colonial border policies or population control measures, allowing the no doubt millions of future so-called refugees a clear path from Africa to the West, further compounding our already deadly population crisis. And these people dare call themselves environmentalists. It seems the environment is the last thing on their minds. So who are the people behind this movement? What is their thinking? What drives them? It's now time to get personal. Because the psychology of these women is merely a visible example of the effect decades of messaging has had. The leader of Birth Strike is a woman named Blythe Pipino. To sum her up, she's a walking stereotype. She is the perfect modern white liberal woman, exhibiting all the mannerisms and opinions required to be accepted within her sheltered metropolitan surroundings. Her background is primarily an artistic one, and she was in a pretty successful band called Volts, which was signed to a major record label, even having a song featured in the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. However, Volts broke up a few years ago and Blythe hasn't hit the same musical heights since, which might explain why she's so balls deep in environmentalism right now. She clearly has connections within the media world, which allows her to be interviewed by newspapers such as The Independent about all manner of things like her polyamorous relationships, as if anyone cares. But it's simply another typical trait of women like her, isn't it? Monogamy is bad. Sleeping with loads of different people and never truly settling down is just the life of a strong modern woman, right? Rootless, hollow, just how Vice magazine likes it. Take a wander through her Twitter feed and you will see other shining examples of how Blythe thinks and acts. She retweets things like this: environmentalists shutting down coal mines in the north, my neck of the woods. This leads me to believe that the plight of the working class isn't something that really bothers her. The loss of industry leading to the destruction of communities, the lack of purpose these people might have, I doubt it matters. Because the only things that are important are shallow political statements like this, jumping on top of a bulldozer, and the self-delusion that these people are actually doing something positive. She also feels strongly about the refugee issue. Surprise, surprise. And according to an interview I read, set up her own refugee-centred charity a couple of years ago, after she visited the Calais camps. How and why did you originally get involved with the current refugee crisis? I went to help put up shelters in Calais and fundraised cash. I protested a few times and then created a homegrown arts political project called Now We Make Tomorrow with my friends. I got involved because this is one of the worst refugee situations since World War II, and it is due in part to the actions of my country. A country whose wealth and status I personally benefit from. And so this is my way of feeding back in an unfair system. I don't believe I am any different to those people. I am not afraid of them. I am afraid of our lack of humanity in the face of their suffering. Already I'm sure you can pick up on the guilt and shame that runs through her blood, but more on that in a bit. Back to Twitter, here's her retweet of a sign that claims the climate crisis is a racist crisis, because of course it is. Even though, as I mentioned, Africa's population will eventually engulf us all, and these people will stand by and say absolutely nothing about it. And finally, of course, we get on to the anti-white stuff. Blythe is a big fan of this bloke, a self-proclaimed Muslim activist, an educated man of colour, American by birth but a Pakistani by blood, and she posts his stuff all the time. Here's a good one. Dear white people, no one is asking you to apologise for your ancestors. We are asking you to dismantle the systems of oppression they built that you maintain and benefit from. Right, yeah, sure. What you really mean is dismantle your societies and willingly lash yourselves on the back for being fortunate enough to have ancestors who left you something great to inherit. Because that's bad, you see. Get it? The civilization, oh, it's trash, ugh. And by extension, so are all of you. So they're the sort of things that Blythe posts to her followers on a daily basis. But last but not least, let's look at Blythe herself, her physical appearance. I think the word we're looking for here is androgynous, which is fitting, so incredibly appropriate, because she, and women like her, have essentially been programmed to think all of these things, to get behind all of these causes, and to reject everything that might stem from tradition. Their politics are self-congratulatory and self-serving, but delivered through a vehicle of guilt and shame and self-loathing. Their personal relationships are flaky, and their vision for the future, far from being a positive one like they've convinced themselves it would actually be nightmarish. It would be a world where everyone is as rootless as they are, where the progress humanity has made would be scuttled in favour of false equality, where our countries would be overrun with outsiders, and where we would lower ourselves out of shame. Blythe is the perfect example of what globalism wants women to be. They couldn't do better even if they made her in a lab, which is why she's all over the mainstream media pushing an anti-traditionalist message to young, terrified women, wrapping it in a noble packaging to make them feel like they'd be fighting for something great when in reality they'd be doing the opposite. One of those poor, scared women is this girl, Alice Brown. She appears on TV with Blythe often, but I first found her on the official Birth Strike YouTube channel along with others, all of whom really do conform to a type. While I could no doubt say the exact same things I'm about to say about Alice about the other women, I want to focus on Alice because, truthfully, I feel sorry for her. I'm not being flippant here, I actually feel like she has been taken advantage of and led down a very harmful path. But let's hear what she has to say for herself.
I'm 24. I am a geography graduate. I work for a small charity.
She's young, has a pretty useless degree, and works for a charity. Say no more. But notice how she's one of these people who has this permanent smile on her face while she speaks. It's always there. That's important.
I became aware of environmental issues when I started off my career as a radio producer, and I ended up getting depression for about a year, and everything came crashing down around me. I lost everything, all my friends and, you know, my job stuff and my career really. And I just had a total reassessment of what was actually important. And then a whole new world opened up for me. Just this passion for the natural world.
Right, so forgive me if I'm off base here, but it sounds like Alice had a complete breakdown that essentially destroyed her career and sent her personal life into a downward spiral. In her words, she said, everything came crashing down around her and she lost everything. Lost everything. But then, what do you know? A light at the end of the tunnel appeared. A calling. A brand new world opened up for her. A world of activism. Being part of something. Feeling like she mattered. Feeling like her life had purpose again. Notice that smile stays fixed on her face as she tells us these things. This woman was literally depressed and in a dark mental state, and now suddenly, she's one of the poster women for rejecting motherhood. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think Alice has sorted herself out? Come on now.
I'm not on a career path anymore. There's no career for me. I actually don't see a future sometimes, because I don't feel there's any point in doing anything until we're in a consensus together to make this a healthier and safer world for everything.
She's given up on her ambitions. She has stopped her life in its tracks. She doesn't see a point in doing anything anymore unless this utopian idea that's been put inside her head comes to pass. But that'll never happen, will it? We all know it, and I suspect deep down she knows it, but she can't admit it or see the truth because this new mission she's on is the only thing she has in her life now. That's it. This girl is hanging on by a thread, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who can see that.
Each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless.
I'll link the entire video down below for you all as well if you want to check it out for yourselves. It's very interesting stuff. As an armchair psychologist. And like I said, the other women on the channel exhibit similar behaviour. Scarlett's journey, for example, was sparked by guilt.
So I moved to the country a few years ago, and when I was driving to work one morning I hit a deer, and I was devastated by that. I was really upset, and I felt that how could I be so upset and still be eating meat and eating dairy. It just felt, I felt like a hypocrite. And that's when I became a vegan, and that's when this whole new world opened up to me. And then a few months ago I went to an environmental conference, and that really changed everything for me actually, because I think it's sort of, I knew bits, I'd read about bits, I knew pockets of information, and then suddenly somehow it all tied together, the dots all joined up, and it was just bang, I came into awareness, came out of denial entirely, and felt like I was in reality for the first time.
She hits a deer, she goes into a dark hole of guilt, becomes a vegan, attends conferences, and now she sees reality. Just to simplify that little journey for you, this woman accidentally hit a deer with her car, and now she's part of a movement that is trying to convince Western women to stop having children. Well, that is quite a big leap, isn't it? From accidentally hitting an animal with your vehicle to being part of something like this. This is not a logical progression. This is rather sinister indeed.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm 24. I live in South London. I am currently doing my master's part-time in anthropology, environment and development. In some ways it almost feels like the choice is being taken away from me, which makes me quite angry, because it's like, it's not... Yes, it's still very much a choice, and I'm still very, I mean, there's only been a few decades in history that women have had that choice. The contraception is relatively new, so But just sort of like morally, doesn't really feel like I'm left with much choice anymore. I have a deep love and respect for this natural world, and I can't bear to see what we're doing to it, and I can't bear to bring a child into what we're doing to it either.
This one is called Nikki, and again, she talks about having choices taken from her. She talks about morality, and then says that she can't bear to see what we are doing to the planet. Yes, mixing morals with guilt doesn't usually lead to positive outcomes. And I mean, it's scary actually seeing clips of these women, especially Nikki here. I can't tell you how many girls I've met that remind me of Nikki, especially when I was in university. It's scary. These women, I believe, were vulnerable people, already somewhat worn down by modernity, searching for purpose, searching for something that would fulfill them, but that something was never going to be having children or living anything remotely close to a traditional lifestyle because, as we know, they've been pushed away from that their entire lives by the media and wider culture. So what do they find in the depths of their depression and profound sadness? A false cause, an empty promise, the possibility of meaning. Yet all they are doing is promoting harm and despair. They've been led astray, and now they are leading others astray too. They want to protect life on Earth, but they've been convinced the best way to do that is to not create life at all. To finish this video, what we're seeing here isn't particularly new, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. This is nothing more than yet another tactic to undermine us, to damage the West, and to drive another nail into the coffin of our people and our civilization. We must resist it, we mustn't fall for it, and for the love of God, if any of these women make you think of someone you know in real life, Christ, get to them before these weirdos do, will you? Thank you all so much for watching once again. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so in a few ways. The first is PayPal, link is down below, or you can buy a magazine from my website. The next magazine is very close to release, it's just getting printed now by my printers, so when that's done, I'll announce it on this channel. Okay, I'll see you next week, bye bye.